Jamal, a boy living in poverty, helps a struggling war veteran with his wheelchair one afternoon, expecting nothing in return. But the next day, a sleek limousine pulls up in front of his run-down house and a mysterious figure steps out, ready to change his life forever. Is this a stroke of luck or a twist of fate? The offer that awaits him will test everything he thought he knew about pride, strength, and the future. But before we dive deeper into the story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you love this story, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on the next exciting chapter. The neighborhood was a battleground of survival. Broken sidewalks cracked under the weight of forgotten dreams, and the air was thick with a mix of exhaust fumes and despair. Jamal Carter, a lanky 14-year-old with eyes that held a maturity far beyond his years, trudged through the chaos. His oversized backpack bounced rhythmically on his shoulders, not from the weight of books, but from the weight of responsibility. The world around him buzzed with the noise of rowdy kids, distant sirens, and arguments spilling out from open apartment windows. Yet for Jamal, the clamor was white noise. His thoughts were louder. The streets weren't just where he lived, they were where he fought to survive. His home, a tiny two-bedroom apartment barely holding together at the seams, awaited him at the end of the cracked pavement. Inside, his mother Maria juggled 2 part-time jobs, and his little sister Lissa clung to him like he was the only anchor in a storm. To her, Jamal wasn't just her older brother, he was her protector, her role model, her superhero. The walk from school was always the same, a gauntlet of mockery and intimidation. Today was no different. "Hey, Jamal!" Travis, the school bully, called out from across the street. His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Travis was flanked by his usual crew of troublemakers, their laughter echoing like a pack of hyenas. Jamal kept his head down, tightening his grip on the frayed straps of his bag. "Still dreaming of making it big, huh? Newsflash, losers like you don't get out of this place," Travis taunted, his words laced with venom. Jamal's chest tightened, but he didn't look back. The words stung, not because they were true, but because a small, terrified part of him feared they might be. He clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms, a quiet reminder that he wasn't as powerless as they thought. By the time he reached his building, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The door creaked as he pushed it open, stepping into the cramped living room. Maria was there, her face weary but kind, wearing the same uniform she left in every morning, a faded blue smock that carried the scent of cleaning supplies. She extended her hand to handle the dental file, but pulled it back from before the captions, wrapped her arms around it, and held it close to her chest, resting her chin on her small hands. "Jamal, look what I drew!" she exclaimed, her wide grin exposing the gap where her front tooth used to be. She held up a crayon drawing of a superhero in a red cape, standing tall against a backdrop of buildings. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, she had scrawled, "My brother, the hero." Jamal's lips curved into a small smile, despite the heaviness in his heart. "Superheroes don't get this tired, Alyssa," he said softly, ruffling her hair. Maria, who had been watching silently from the kitchen counter, approached him with a hesitant expression. Her hands were dry and cracked from endless scrubbing, but her touch was warm when she placed them on his shoulder. "Jamal," she began, her voice low, almost apologetic. "I got the bill today. They're threatening to cut the power if we don't pay by Friday." Jamal's heart sank. He didn't need to ask how much. It didn't matter. Whatever the number, it was more than they had. "I'll figure something out," he said, his voice steady but hollow. Maria's eyes glistened, but she nodded. She didn't have the strength to argue. That night, Jamal lay awake in the tiny bedroom he shared with Elisa. The moonlight spilled through the broken blinds, illuminating the peeling wallpaper. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with unspoken fears. Tomorrow would be another day of fighting to keep the lights on, fighting to protect Elisa's dreams, fighting to hold on to the sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could rise above all this. Outside, the city hummed with its restless energy, but inside, Jamal made a silent vow. He wasn't going to let the world break him, not tonight, not ever. Jamal tightened the straps of his backpack and adjusted his grip as the familiar stretch of cracked pavement came into view. The day had worn on him, each step feeling heavier than the last. The lingering sting of Travis's taunts still buzzed faintly in his mind, but he buried it. There wasn't room for self-pity, not in his world. As he turned a corner near the park, a faint, strained sound caught his attention. It was the groan of metal scraping against concrete, followed by a frustrated grunt. Jamal squinted ahead and spotted Mr. Henderson, the neighborhood's reclusive war veteran, struggling to push his wheelchair up the steep ramp leading to his small, run-down house. The old man's face was taut with effort, his weathered hands gripping the wheels tightly, but they slipped against the incline. For a moment, Jamal considered walking on. He had his own problems to deal with, and the weight of his family's struggles loomed over him like a storm cloud. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was Alyssa's drawing still tucked safely in his backpack, a reminder of the superhero she believed him to be. Or maybe it was the memory of his father, who had always said, "Help where you can, even if no one helps you." With a steadying breath, Jamal crossed the street, calling out as he approached. "Hey, sir, let me help you," he said, his voice calm but firm. Mr. Henderson paused and glanced up, his furrowed brow softening. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "You're a good boy," he said, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of 100 battles fought and lost. "Not many like you." Without waiting for a response, Jamal set down his backpack and positioned himself behind the wheelchair. The ramp was steeper than it looked, and each step required more effort than he'd anticipated. His muscles burned as he pushed, the chair wobbling slightly under the strain. Mr. Henderson tried to help by gripping the wheels, but his strength wasn't what it used to be. "Almost there," Jamal muttered, more to himself than to the old man. Finally, with one last heave, they reached the top of the ramp. Jamal straightened up, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, and stepped back as Mr. Henderson maneuvered his chair toward the door. "Thank you, son," Mr. Henderson said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You didn't have to do that." Jamal shrugged, feeling a twinge of embarrassment. "It's no big deal." But to Mr. Henderson, it clearly was. He studied Jamal for a moment, his eyes sharp and probing. "You got a good heart, boy," he said. "This world could use more like you." Jamal offered a small, shy smile and turned to leave, but Mr. Henderson stopped him with a question that caught him off guard. "In a hurry?" Jamal hesitated. "Not really." "Come inside," Mr. Henderson said, gesturing toward the door. "I owe you at least a glass of water." There was something in his tone, a mixture of insistence and warmth, that made it hard to refuse. Jamal followed him into the house, a modest space cluttered with old military memorabilia and faded photographs. The walls were lined with bookshelves, their contents an eclectic mix of war novels, history texts, and dusty encyclopedias. A faint scent of tobacco lingered in the air. "Have a seat," Mr. Henderson said, nodding toward a worn-out armchair. "You look like you could use a break." Jamal sank into the chair, his backpack resting at his feet, as Mr. Henderson wheeled himself into the kitchen. He returned moments later with 2 glasses of water, one of which he handed to Jamal. "Thanks," Jamal said, taking a sip. The water was cool and refreshing, a small comfort after a long day. For a while they sat in companionable silence. Then, as if unable to help himself, Mr. Henderson began to speak. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "when I was your age, I thought I had the whole world figured out. Thought I was invincible." He chuckled dryly. "Life has a funny way of proving you wrong." Jamal listened, intrigued despite himself. There was a weight to Mr. Henderson's words, a depth that demanded attention. "Lost a lot over the years," the old man continued. "Friends, family, pieces of myself. But you," he pointed at Jamal with a gnarled finger, "you remind me of something I'd almost forgotten." Jamal frowned, unsure what he meant. "What's that?" Even when life knocks you down, there's always a reason to get back up," Mr. Henderson said, his gaze steady. "People like you, son, you're the reason." The words hit Jamal harder than he expected. He didn't see himself as anything special. He was just trying to survive, to keep his family afloat in a world that seemed determined to drag them under. But hearing those words from someone like Mr. Henderson, a man who had seen and endured so much, stirred something in him. Before he left, Mr. Henderson reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, weathered envelope. He held it out to Jamal. "What's this?" Jamal asked, eyeing it warily. "Something that might help," Mr. Henderson said cryptically. "Don't open it here. Take it home. Think about what I said." Jamal hesitated, but eventually took the envelope, slipping it into his backpack. He thanked Mr. Henderson again and left the house, his mind buzzing with curiosity and uncertainty. As he walked home, the envelope seemed to grow heavier with each step. What could it possibly contain? Why had Mr. Henderson given it to him? The question swirled in his mind, a storm of possibilities that refused to settle. When he finally reached the apartment, the usual chaos greeted him. Alyssa running around with her crayons, Maria cooking dinner in the cramped kitchen. But Jamal barely noticed. He went straight to his room, closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope in his hands. With a deep breath, he opened it. Inside was a handwritten note and a crisp $100 bill. The note read, "This is just a small token of thanks, but it's also a challenge. Use it to do something good, not just for yourself, but for someone else. The world needs more people like you. Keep being the hero your sister thinks you are. Mr. Henderson." Jamal stared at the note, his heart pounding. The money was a godsend. It could help with the electricity bill, ease some of the pressure his family was under. But it was the words that struck him the hardest. They carried a weight, a responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for. Yet, deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore them. That night, as he lay awake in the darkness, Jamal made a decision. He didn't know how or where to start, but he was going to honor Mr. Henderson's challenge. He was going to prove that the old man hadn't been wrong about him. And for the first time in a long while, Jamal felt something stir in his chest, a glimmer of hope. The next morning, the faint hum of an engine disrupted the usual quiet of Jamal's street. He pulled aside the curtain in their small living room, eyes widening as he saw a sleek, black limousine parked in front of their building. It gleamed like an alien spacecraft against the weathered landscape of their neighborhood. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if Mr. Henderson had somehow sent trouble his way. A sharp knock at the door jolted him out of his thoughts. Maria, balancing a pot of steaming oatmeal, called out, "Jamal, get the door." He hesitated, but Elisa's curiosity got the better of her. "Who is it?" she asked, bouncing on her toes as Jamal finally swung the door open. Standing there, framed by the light of the morning sun, was Mr. Henderson. Beside him was a tall, impeccably dressed man with silver-streaked hair, a navy blue suit, and an aura of confidence that seemed to command attention without effort. Jamal's jaw tightened as he met the man's piercing gaze. "Morning, Jamal," Mr. Henderson greeted warmly, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. "I brought Someone who wants to meet you." The man extended a hand. "Charles Whitmore?" He introduced himself with a firm handshake. "I'm an old friend of Mr. Henderson's." Jamal stepped aside, unsure of what to say. Maria appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and froze when she saw the visitors. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with caution. Charles smiled disarmingly. "I hope I'm not intruding, Mrs. Carter. I came because I heard about your son here." He gestured toward Jamal. "Mr. Henderson told me about what happened yesterday, and I couldn't stay quiet." Jamal stiffened. It wasn't a big deal," he muttered, his eyes darting to Mr. Henderson, silently questioning why the old man had brought this stranger into their home. "Whew! But it is," Charles countered, his voice steady and deliberate. "It's rare to find someone your age willing to step up for others without expecting anything in return. That's what caught my attention." Maria stepped closer, her curiosity piqued. "What does this have to do with us?" Charles took a deep breath, glancing at Mr. Henderson before speaking. "I'm in a position to help. Not just your son, but your whole family. Financially, educationally, whatever you need to get out of this neighborhood and into a better life." The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Elisa's wide-eyed gaze darted between the adults, her innocence magnifying the weight of the moment. Jamal's reaction was immediate and visceral. He shook his head, his fists clenching at his sides. "No, we're fine. We don't need charity." "Jamal!" Maria's sharp tone cut through the air, her face flushed with frustration. "Don't speak for all of us." "It's not charity," Charles interjected, raising his hands as if to diffuse the tension. "It's recognition for your character, Jamal, for what you've done." Jamal's voice rose, a rare burst of emotion breaking through his usual calm. "What I've done? I helped push a wheelchair up a ramp? That's not worth all this. I don't need some stranger showing up to save us. We've been fine on our own." Maria's eyes flared with anger. "Fine? You call this fine? Struggling to keep the lights on, borrowing food from neighbors, watching Alyssa eat half a meal because there's not enough for all of us? Don't you dare let your pride ruin this for us, Jamal." Jamal's throat tightened, her words cutting deeper than any of Travis's insults ever had. He opened his mouth to respond but couldn't find the right words. He hated the way they stared at him, waiting for him to concede, to admit that they needed help. The truth clawed at him, but he refused to let it out. I don't trust it," he finally muttered, his voice low. "Nobody gives something for nothing." Charles stepped forward, his tone soft but firm. "You're right, Jamal, most people don't. But not everyone operates like that. Sometimes people pay forward the kindness they've received. That's all I'm trying to do here." Maria turned to Charles, her voice tinged with desperation. "Mr. Whitmore, please don't take his answer as ours. We need this." Charles nodded, his expression understanding. "Of course, but I think it's important for Jamal to feel comfortable too. If he needs time to think it over, I'm happy to give him that." Maria spun back to Jamal, her frustration bubbling over. "How much more time do you need? Do you think opportunities like this come around every day? Or ever?" Jamal's stomach churned. He hated seeing his mother like this, her voice shaking, her eyes pleading. But the thought of accepting what felt like a handout made his skin crawl. "I need some air," he said abruptly, grabbing his backpack and brushing past them. "Jamal," Maria called after him, but he didn't stop. Outside, the streets felt suffocating, despite the open air. Jamal walked aimlessly, his thoughts spiraling. Why did Charles Whitmore care about them? What did he really want? And why did his mother seem so willing to trust a stranger? His feet carried him to the park, where he dropped onto a weathered bench. He pulled the envelope from his bag, the one Mr. Henderson had given him the day before. The $100 bill was still inside, untouched. He stared at it, his chest tightening with conflicting emotions. Mr. Henderson's words echoed in his mind. Use it to do something good, not just for yourself, but for someone else. He clenched his jaw. What did doing good even mean? Accepting Charles Whitmore's help might help his family, but it also felt like surrendering. He didn't want to be a project or a charity case. He wanted to earn their way out. The sound of footsteps startled him. He looked up to see Mr. Henderson, his wheelchair gliding steadily toward the bench. "Figured I'd find you here," the old man said, parking himself beside Jamal. Jamal didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the envelope in his hands. "Mind if I share a story?" Mr. Henderson asked. "If you enjoyed today's story, or if it touched your heart in any way, don't forget to like." Jamal shrugged. "You're gonna tell me anyway." Mr. Henderson chuckled, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "When I came back from the war, I was a mess. Lost my leg, lost my job, lost damn near everything. But there was this one guy, a fellow soldier, who wouldn't let me sink. He gave me a job when no one else would. Said it wasn't charity, just one brother helping another." Jamal finally looked up, his expression skeptical. "And you didn't feel weird about it?" "Of course I did," Mr. Henderson admitted. "Pride's a stubborn thing. But I realized something. There's no shame in accepting help when it's given with respect. That man's kindness gave me the chance to stand on my own 2 feet. Well, figuratively speaking." Jamal's grip on the envelope tightened. But what if it's not what it seems? What if there's a catch? Mr. Henderson's gaze softened. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Jamal. If there's a catch, you'll see it. But don't let fear stop you from giving your family the life they deserve." By the time Jamal returned home, the limousine was gone, but the tension lingered in the air. Maria sat at the kitchen table, her face pale and her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Alyssa was asleep on the couch, her tiny form curled under a thin blanket. Jamal approached his mother cautiously. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, the words tasting foreign but necessary. "I didn't mean to make it harder." Maria looked up, her expression softening. "I just want what's best for you and Elisa, Jamal. You think I like asking for help, but sometimes we have to swallow our pride for the people we love." Jamal nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. If Mr. Whitmore's offer is still on the table, we should at least hear him out. Maria's eyes glistened, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. "Thank you." The next day, Charles returned, and this time, Jamal listened. The man's plan wasn't just to throw money at their problems, but to provide opportunities, scholarships, job training, and resources to help them build a future. For the first time, Jamal felt a glimmer of hope that didn't feel like charity, but like a chance to rewrite their story. And as he shook Charles's hand, Jamal realized that accepting help didn't make him weak, it made him strong enough to fight for a better life, not just for himself, but for the people who depended on him. The evening sky turned shades of deep indigo as Jamal sat in the silence of his room, the faint hum of the city leaking through the thin walls. The envelope from Mr. Henderson sat open on his desk, the crisp $100 bill and the note now well worn from his restless handling. Every word of the note replayed in his mind like a mantra. Use it to do something good, not just for yourself, but for someone else. But what would his father think? Jamal could still hear his dad's voice in his memories, full of pride and grit. "A Carter doesn't take handouts. We build what we need with our own 2 hands." His father had always worked tirelessly, refusing shortcuts, even when it meant sacrifices. Jamal admired that. He wanted to embody that, but as he glanced at Elisa's crayon drawing pinned to the wall, her faith in him as a superhero, he wondered. Was turning away help truly strength, or was it fear, rank pride as a disguise? The weight of Mr. Henderson's words and his father's memory bore down on him. It was as though he were caught between two worlds, one rooted in resilience and self-reliance, and the other in courage, the kind that allowed you to take risks for those you love. Jamal clenched his fists, his thoughts churning. He'd always told himself he had to be the strong one, but maybe strength wasn't about refusing help. Maybe it was about having the courage to do what was best for his family, even if it felt uncomfortable. He didn't know if his father would have agreed, but he knew one thing. Alyssa and Maria deserved better than what he could give them alone. With newfound determination, Jamal rose from his bed and stepped into the living room where Maria sat folding laundry. She looked up, her face weary but warm. "Ma," Jamal began, his voice hesitant. He paused, the words catching in his throat. Finally, he forced them out. I think we should call Mr. Whitmore." Maria froze, the shirt in her hand slipping to the floor. Her wide eyes searched his face, looking for signs of hesitation or doubt. "Are you sure, Jamal?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, the conviction in his chest growing with each passing second. "Yeah, Ma, I've been thinking. About Dad. About what Mr. Henderson said. I don't think it's about taking charity. It's about taking a chance to make things better for you, for Alyssa." Maria's eyes filled with tears, and she covered her mouth with one hand, her shoulders trembling. "Oh, baby," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so proud of you." She stood and pulled him into a tight embrace, her tears dampening his shirt. Jamal let her hold him, feeling a strange mix of relief and resolve. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew this was the first step toward something different, something better. The next morning, Maria made the call. It felt surreal watching her speak with Charles Whitmore, her voice steady but tinged with emotion as she explained their decision. Jamal sat silently at the kitchen table, his fingers tapping nervously against the wood as Maria relayed the details of a meeting set for that afternoon. When they arrived at the appointed location, a sleek office building downtown, Jamal felt like a fish out of water. The marble floors gleamed under bright lights and the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne. Maria held Alyssa's hand tightly, her nervous energy palpable, while Jamal kept his gaze straight ahead, determined not to let his unease show. Charles greeted them warmly in the lobby, his demeanor as polished as the building itself. "Jamal, Mrs. Carter, Alyssa," he said with a genuine smile, extending a hand. "I'm glad you decided to come." "Thank you for giving us the chance," Maria replied, her voice steady but brimming with gratitude. Charles gestured toward the elevator. "Let's talk upstairs." The ride to the top floor was a quiet one, the only sound the faint hum of the elevator. When the doors opened, they were led into a spacious office, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city. Jamal felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Charles motioned for them to sit, his expression serious but kind. "First, I want to thank you, Jamal," he began, his tone sincere. "It's not easy to accept help, especially when you've been raised to value independence, but what you've done, what you're doing, shows incredible maturity." Jamal nodded, his throat tight. "I just want to do what's right for my family." Charles leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "And that's exactly why I'm offering this. This isn't charity, Jamal. It's an investment in a young man who's already proven he has the character to succeed." He slid a folder across the desk toward Maria. Inside were details about the financial support he was offering: a scholarship fund for Jamal and Alyssa, assistance with their housing situation, and even a job opportunity for Maria at one of his companies. Maria's hands trembled as she turned the pages, her eyes darting between the papers and Charles. This is more than I ever imagined," she whispered. "It's not just about money," Charles explained. "It's about giving you the tools to build the life you deserve. But it will take work, and it won't always be easy." Jamal's gaze lingered on the folder. He felt the weight of the opportunity before him, the magnitude of what it could mean for his family. But there was still one question burning in his mind. "Us?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. "Why do you care?" Charles smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "Because someone once did the same for me," he admitted. "I grew up in a neighborhood not much different from yours. If it weren't for a teacher who saw potential in me and fought to give me a chance, I wouldn't be here today. Now I try to pay that forward." Jamal nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. He felt a flicker of understanding, a connection to Charles that bridged the gap between their vastly different worlds. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Charles's team helped the Carters move into a modest but comfortable apartment in a safer neighborhood, and Maria began her new job, her confidence blossoming as she learned new skills. Alyssa started at a school with better resources, and for the first time, Jamal saw her come home excited about her day, her backpack filled with books and projects. As for Jamal, he enrolled in an after-school program that Charles had recommended, one focused on leadership and community service. At first, he felt out of place, surrounded by kids who seemed so sure of themselves. But as the weeks went by, he began to find his footing, his confidence growing with each small success. One evening, as he sat at his desk, finishing a homework assignment, he glanced at the crayon drawing still pinned to the wall. Elise's words, "My brother, the hero," no longer felt like a distant ideal. They felt like the promise he was finally starting to fulfill. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was building a future. And that, he realized, was the true meaning of courage. The first morning of Jamal's new routine began with the blare of an alarm clock cutting through the stillness of their new apartment. He blinked into the dim light of his room, his muscles stiff from the previous day's workout. He glanced at the photo on his desk, a worn picture of his father in uniform, standing tall with pride. It was his new ritual, a silent moment of reflection to start the day. Jamal's schedule had shifted dramatically since Charles Whitmore's intervention. Mornings were for tutoring sessions, afternoons for school, and evenings for physical training. He had signed up for a military prep program at Mr. Henderson's suggestion, inspired by the stories of his father's service that his mother had shared over the years. It wasn't just a way to honor his father's legacy, it was a path to discipline, structure, and opportunity. His tutors were patient but firm, guiding him through subjects that once seemed insurmountable. With each passing week, his grades improved. He began to feel a sense of control over his future that he hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't just academics. The prep program demanded physical fitness, and Jamal pushed himself hard, running laps around the park, lifting weights, and mastering the difficult drills without making a wrong thing, and mastering the difficulties of invigoration. At school, Jamal's transformation didn't go unnoticed. Travis, once relentless in his taunts, had grown quieter, his jeers replaced by wary glances. Jamal no longer walked with his head down or avoided eye contact. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his shoulders squared and his eyes steady. The power dynamic had shifted, and even Travis seemed to sense it. One afternoon during gym class, Travis approached him by the bleachers. Jamal tensed, expecting another insult or shove, but instead, Travis hesitated, his usual smirk replaced by something more uncertain. Yo, Jamal, he said, scratching the back of his neck. You've been different lately." Jamal raised an eyebrow. Different how? Travis shrugged, looking anywhere but at Jamal. I don't know, just not like before. Jamal's gaze didn't waver. Maybe I just got tired of putting up with your crap, he said evenly, his tone firm but not angry. Travis opened his mouth to respond but faltered. For the first time, he seemed at a loss for words. Without another word, he walked away, leaving Jamal standing tall by the bleachers. Not all interactions were tense. One day, after school, Marcus, one of Travis's usual crew, caught up with Jamal in the hallway. Ugh. Marcus had always been a follower, rarely speaking unless prompted by someone louder. Hey man, Marcus said, his tone softer than Jamal had ever heard. I just wanted to say sorry for, everything. Jamal stopped walking and turned to face him, his expression neutral. Why now? He asked, his voice calm but curious. Marcus hesitated, then sighed. Because you're not like the rest of us. You're different. You're trying to do something with your life. I see that now. Jamal studied him for a moment before offering a small smile. Thanks, I'm just trying to focus on what matters. Marcus nodded, relief washing over his face. If you ever need anything, let me know. The exchange, though brief, lingered in Jamal's mind. It wasn't validation he sought, but it felt good to know that his efforts were being noticed, not for recognition, but for the example he was setting. At home, the changes were just as evident. Maria, now thriving in her new job, carried herself with a renewed sense of purpose. Her laughter, once rare, filled the apartment in the evenings as she helped Elisa with homework or tried her hand at new recipes. Elisa herself seemed brighter, more confident, her drawings now depicting a family full of joy and strength. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Maria looked at Jamal with a mixture of pride and curiosity. You've been working so hard lately, she said. What's driving you, baby? Jamal paused, his fork hovering over his plate. He glanced at Elisa, then back at his mother. You both are, he said simply. And Dad. I want to make him proud. Maria's eyes glistened, and she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. He would be, she said softly. More than you know. The turning point came during a community event organized by Charles Whitmore's foundation. It was a gathering meant to celebrate the success of families who had benefited from his programs, and Jamal was asked to speak. The thought terrified him. Public speaking wasn't his forte, but Maria encouraged him, her confidence in him unwavering. Standing at the podium that evening, Jamal felt his heart race as dozens of eyes fixed on him. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edges of the wooden lectern. My name is Jamal Carter, he began, his voice steady but low. A year ago, I didn't think I'd be here. I didn't think I'd be anywhere. He paused, scanning the crowd. I thought asking for help made you weak. I thought it meant giving up, but I was wrong. Asking for help isn't weakness, it's strength. It's knowing you can't do it alone and having the courage to let others in. His voice grew steadier, more confident. Because of the support I've received, I'm not just surviving, I'm building something for my family, for myself, and for anyone who's ever felt like they didn't have a chance. The audience erupted into applause as Jamal stepped away from the podium, his heart pounding. Maria and Elisa beamed from the front row, their pride unmistakable. That night, as they returned home, Jamal felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He wasn't just the boy who pushed a wheelchair up a ramp anymore. He wasn't just the kid from a struggling neighborhood. He was something more. Someone who had taken the hand offered to him and used it to climb higher. And as he lay in bed staring at the photo of his father on the desk, he whispered, I hope I'm making you proud, Dad. He didn't need an answer, he already knew. The day of the interview arrived, crisp and bright, as if the world itself was offering Jamal a clean slate. Dressed in the best shirt Maria could press, he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his collar and smoothing imaginary creases. His reflection stared back, and for a moment, he hardly recognized himself. The boy weighed down by fear and self-doubt was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone determined. Maria peeked into his room, her eyes soft and brimming with pride. "You ready, baby?" she asked. Jamal nodded, the nervous flutter in his stomach quieted by her presence. "Yeah, Mom, I'm ready." At the military prep program office, the air was charged with quiet intensity. Jamal sat in the waiting area, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Around him, other candidates waited, their polished shoes tapping against the floor in unison with the ticking clock. Jamal's heartbeat quickened, but he forced himself to breathe deeply, grounding himself in the thought of his family. When his name was called, he stood tall and followed the officer into the interview room. The space was simple but imposing, with a large desk, neatly organized files, and the sharp scent of leather and polish. The interviewer, a stern man with sharp features and piercing eyes, gestured for Jamal to sit. "Jamal Carter?" the man began, glancing at the file in front of him. "You've had an impressive turnaround this past year. Your grades, your extracurricular activities, and your recommendations all speak highly of your determination. But I want to hear it from you. Why do you want to join this program?" Jamal took a deep breath, his father's words echoing in his mind. "Speak from the heart, son. That's where the truth lives." "Sir," he began, his voice steady but earnest, "I've spent most of my life thinking I had to do everything on my own, that asking for help made me weak. But over the past year, I've learned that strength comes from recognizing when you need others to stand with you." The interviewer leaned forward, listening intently as Jamal continued. "This program is an opportunity, not just to honor my father's legacy as a serviceman, but to build a future where I can give back to others the way people have helped me. I want to be a leader, someone who inspires strength and resilience, not just for myself, but for the people who look up to me, like my little sister." For a moment, the room was silent. Then, the interviewer's stern expression softened into something almost like a smile. "Well said, Carter. Well said." Hours later, Jamal stepped out of the building into the warm afternoon sunlight. The knot of anxiety in his chest had loosened, replaced by a cautious optimism. He had done his best, spoken his truth, and left it all on the table. Whatever the outcome, he knew he had grown from the experience. As he walked home, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from Maria. "We're so proud of you. No matter what happens, love Ma and Alyssa." He smiled, his pace quickening. When he reached their apartment, Maria and Alyssa were waiting by the door, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "How did it go?" Maria asked, her hands clasped tightly in anticipation. Jamal hesitated, wanting to keep them in suspense for just a moment longer. Then, with a wide grin, he said, "I aced it." Maria let out a cry of joy, pulling him into a tight hug. Alyssa jumped up and down, cheering, "I know it! I know it!" "Your dad would be so proud of you," Maria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jamal hugged her back, his voice soft but full of conviction. "I hope so, Ma. I'll keep trying." That evening, as the city settled into its quiet rhythm, Jamal found himself drawn to the small balcony outside his room. The night sky stretched endlessly above him, its vastness both humbling and comforting. He sat on the wooden bench, pulling out a folded letter from his pocket. It was his father's last letter, written before his final deployment. The words, worn from years of reading, were a familiar balm, Jamal, no matter where life takes you, remember that strength isn't about how much you can carry on your own. It's about knowing when to lean on others and when to let them lean on you. I'm proud of you already, son. Keep moving forward, one step at a time. Jamal's eyes glistened as he held the letter close to his chest. For the first time, he felt the truth of those words, not just in his mind, but in his heart. Everything he had endured, every struggle, every doubt, had led him to this moment. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving, building a future brick by brick. As the cool breeze swept over him, he whispered into the stillness, "One step at a time. I can do this." The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if to echo his resolve. And in that quiet, infinite expanse, Jamal felt the presence of his father, of Mr. Henderson, of Charles Whitmore, and most importantly, of Maria and Alyssa. Together, they had built a foundation strong enough to carry him into the future. He wasn't alone. He never had been. And with each step forward, he knew he was walking towards something greater than he had ever imagined. A life shaped by love, resilience, and the unshakable belief that no dream was too far out of reach. If you enjoyed today's story, or if it touched your heart in any way, don't forget to like,